Welcome back to Quick and Effective Environment Illustration. In this lesson, we're going to blur up those background clouds and start painting them, start rendering them out. So I'm simply going up to Gaussian blur and blurring them. Not much to it. If we had done this earlier on, the effect would have been too striking and too strong, and it would have infringed. It would have stood out. It would have been jarring. It would have messed us up too early in the process. But blurring them now as one of the last stages, I'm seeing it with in the environment that it belongs, where you see where the rest of the picture is brought up to this level by bringing the background quick. When you blur it, you quickly bring it up to this whole new level. That so early in the picture, nothing is even nearly, approaching this finished stage. However, now the rest of the image is nearly finished, and so applying a filter that will, in a sense, amp up the finish level of an element of your picture. You want to apply that at the right time. It's the same reason you would never apply a lens flare early in the image. It's too much of a jump in realism or convincing or too much of an effect to be used too early. Same with motion blur or radial blur. These effects are fine and they have a place, and Photoshop does them. You can't do these effects in traditional media is quite difficult, and Photoshop, it's one of the reasons to use Photoshop. So there's no reason not to use filters and effects that work. There's just a reason not to use them at the wrong time, because they certainly can throw your picture off and give you an artificial look and start to cause headaches and give you problems. But once you have a technique and a procedure yourself, you learn what works, and you learn when it does, and you follow that procedure, and hopefully some of the lessons from this course, will add to your toolkit so that you have a little more procedure and you have a different way of approaching some of these works in Photoshop. And I know my technique is constantly changing. My procedure, I'm learning new stuff every time I use the program. You can learn a shortcut or a different way or a new way to set your brush up, and it's all and that's not to mention that the software is always evolving itself, and it's always updating, and there's going to be new brush presets and parameters in the future and different ways of getting these marks. So it's only natural that you yourself continue to develop new marks and new ideas and new ways of working. You're going to paint clouds much differently if it's your first year using Photoshop than you will if it's your 10th year, and you're going to paint clouds much differently, and you'll be using at a much different effort level. It'll either be really hard or it'll be easy, depending on if it's your first time painting clouds, or if it's your 100th time painting clouds, or even your 1,000th. And so the technique I'm using here is the technique that's currently working for me. And it is just the same as the technique I've used elsewhere in the picture of painting in, carving back out, bringing back in, and except now I'm keeping the edges soft. I'm using opacity more. I'm letting things blend and fade out, and I'm keeping things blurred, but it's the same technique of blocking a color, lay down a quick color, and then pull out what you don't need from it. Ideally, you would just have, to be the quickest and most effective, you would have a brush that you could just sweep across the canvas, and it would create the edge that you're looking for, create this clouded effect. And in Photoshop, you mess around enough, you can create brushes that get you there. Not 100%. You still need to go back and pick out and correct and soften and adjust here and there. But the closest thing to that ideal brush that just gives you the perfect edge that you're looking for is to lay down a close effort, a mark that is close, and just go in and pick out this corner and that corner where you need to soften it, or add a little accent here where you need a little more. Now, of course, spending time on the clouds, you got to adjust the sky, keep the colors balanced, keep everything reading, and, with every mark, bringing it closer and closer to that finish level. Now that I've refined the shapes pretty well, I've got, some variation, some harder and softer edges, some, the layer shape is pretty much there. I can go in now on the light layer and start to model out that light layer shape. Now remember, in the mountain, main mountain shape is the shadow of the mountain. The light layer is clipping mask above that shadow. In the clouds, it's the opposite. The main layer shape is the light sides of the cloud, and the clipping mask layer above it is the shadow color. It's the exact same technique, it's just flipped, because in the clouds, the larger mass is the light, and in the shadow, in the mountain, the larger mass is the shadow. And that's usually how you'll set it up. If this picture was mostly sunlit and the shadow was the accent, likely all the first layer shapes that we create will represent that light world, the light side, and we'll carve out that shape. And on top of that, we'd put a clipping mask layer down and paint the shadow the way we're treating the clouds. And I'm just like on the outlines of the clouds of the layer shape, the outlines of this shadow side, I need to keep it really soft, so soft, and that you need to smudge, you need to airbrush, because if you compare, the difference in edge or the turn of the plane, the turn of the form of these clouds compared to this tree, it's spectacular, the difference of how crisp the edges on this tree are, up close to you in the foreground. And a mark of the same size in the clouds, represents the space of 1,000 feet, and in the foreground, a mark of that size is just an inch. And you really get a sense of that when you do landscapes and environments. You really get a sense of using different techniques to create the impression of the element you're drawing or painting. Clouds sure are fun to paint. They're hard to paint from life because they're always moving, and painting from pictures, the photograph flattens it a little and sometimes doesn't do it justice. But if you ever get the right day where the clouds seem to be standing still, that's the day to do a quick study and get a sense of how to make a mark that captures the look you're going for. Because the more studies you do, the quicker you get it, the more you learn, the more experience you have, and the more confidently you can lay down a mark and know that it's going to represent what it is you're trying to get it to represent. There's a lot to that. There's a lot to practice and building up confidence. Okay, I'm going to spend some more time, just use the same technique and finish rendering out all these clouds. And in the next and final lesson, we'll add some final details and rendering to the foreground and take a look at the picture as a whole and wrap this environment painting up.